Hey y'all, Pi here, and we are back in our life, beginnings and always. And this is my first time sitting down to record another episode since my hiatus. Those of you on YouTube did not even notice, I'm sure. But I am back, either way. Anyway, we are back, and we are going to do a road trip. Even though you were awake, the sun had barely peeked its head above the horizon, and the sky above was still dark, though lightening by the minute. Usually you wouldn't be up so early, especially during summer vacation, but today was different. Today, instead of the lazy days you were used to, everything around you was a flurry of activity as both your family and Coves prepared for what lay ahead. Because parked in the street just outside your house was a massive RV camper, so big you couldn't even see Cove's house behind it. Ooh. His parents had rented the RV for a few days to take him on a short road trip to see the Redwood National Park. Ooh, I want to go there someday. When the world's not on fire, you know. Be nice. You glanced at Cove, who was standing nearby, taking in the scene in front of him. The prospect of the trip had to be a mixed bag for him, but it was only 3 days, so it seemed he was dealing with it as best he could. Especially now that you and your family were joining them. You weren't sure how exactly it had happened. You knew your parents and Coves spoke to each other often, and somewhere along the way plans were made after Cliff offered to share the space. The parents all thought it was a fantastic idea. They usually do. You had already gotten a good look inside while helping to load everything in, and you had to admit that while it was a really big car, fitting that many people inside was going to be snug. Oh no, there's only one. Ooh. It's gonna be exciting.
Let's go.
Move it or lose it, kiddo. Mom bustled past with the cooler in one hand and a large bottle of water under the other. I'm guessing one of those, like, gallon bottles? She was upbeat for this early in the morning. I love this. Ma, however, seemed to be on the other side of the wavelength. She followed behind her wife, dragging her feet on every step. That sounds like someone I know in the mornings. I'm gonna need a whole jug of coffee once we hit the road. Yeah? So, IRL, I am a morning person, but also I love coffee because I don't ever sleep. So I'm gonna say I'm somewhere in the middle ground. You felt like you were a middle ground between the two. You just tried to keep up and took in some deep breaths. The air was still a little damp from dew, but you didn't mind it. And then at the end of the chain came your sister. She had a bone to pick before the trip officially started. Her rattling off critiques added some level of normalcy to everything new going on.
Ugh.
I don't get why I can't sleep in the bed tonight. Joy is the youngest, and I'll never fall asleep in that loft. We're trying to make things fair on everyone. If you want to play the oldest card, you should be offering to take the loft both nights. It's important for for big siblings to make sacrifices for their younger ones. Yeah. Though, to be fair, my poor kid brother usually ended up on the cot whenever we didn't have enough space in beds for him. Poor kid. Elizabeth huffed, not happy with that answer in the slightest, and folded her arms, leaning back against the side of the RV. The trip plans had been nailed down prior, the sleeping arrangements included. Elizabeth still held on to her objections with them. There was a main area of the RV with a couch, a loft, and some floor space. At the end of the car was a room with a large bed. Your moms were sharing the bed, Kyra was on the couch, and father and son intended to sleep on the floor. Ooh. The adults determined you and Elizabeth would switch between the small loft above the driver's seat and sharing the bed with moms. Nobody deserves to sleep on the floor. Absolutely nobody. You thought it was unfair that Cove had to sleep on the floor. After all, it was supposed to be a trip for him and his family before yours ended up coming along too. Now he had been kicked out of every bed-like space and put on the floor. There had to be another way to organize things so it was better for him. I'm gonna be bold. I'm gonna be real fucking bold. You suggested sharing the loft with Cove. Cove and I could share the loft when I'm up there. I don't mind making room for him. You took a glance over at Cove, but noticed that he wouldn't meet your eye in return. He wasn't able to say anything in response to the suggestion either.
No, no, no.
No, that loft is too tiny for 2 people, even if those people are teens. The last thing we need is one of you rolling off and crushing poor Cliff beneath you. Who will take over his driving shifts? The 3 other parents all laughed at your mom's jokes. You finally caught Cove's eye, and he gave you a tiny smile before shrugging. With a sigh, you had to admit defeat. Alright, you lot. Does everyone have everything else they need? We're heading out in 5 minutes. Now's the time to double check. You don't want to forget something important. At the word, Elizabeth yelped and dashed back into the house, her bedhead hair bouncing behind her as she went. Oh no. Ma came over and gave you a smile, setting her hands on her hips. How about you, Joy? Do you have all your clothes packed? Toiletries, deodorant, floss? Anything else you can think of? So I'm gonna go ahead and admit my mother's the packer in our family. But I do alright on my own. I usually get everything. And even if I don't get everything, I'm confident that I've gotten everything until I discover that I haven't. So, you were confident you had it all. Wanting to make sure everything was organized and ready to go, you had packed the night before and set your alarm too. Oh, I'm not that organized. Well, actually no, that's not true. That is completely false, actually. I am that organized. I have nothing further to say about that. Yep, I'm good. That's great. We'll have to wait for the ones who weren't as organized, but we'll be heading off shortly. With a few minutes left to spare before leaving, you mentally went over what you had packed for the trip. Clothes, a pillow and blanket, usual day-to-day gear for most people. You also had more personal things, such as my favorite stuffed animal. I have more than one. I currently have one snug under my arm. Without fail, it always made you feel more comfortable whenever you went somewhere new. It was like taking a little piece of home away with you. A couple of things to read. You had packed one of your old favorites, a new one you'd never tried before. You knew you'd have plenty of time for them both on such a long drive. A portable gaming console. The drive to Redwood National Park would take an entire day one way, so you wanted to make sure you had a way to entertain yourself while traveling there and back. Your camera. It was just a little pocket camera you had gotten from your mom's, but you couldn't miss the opportunity to take some new snaps. An MP3 player with headphones. With so much time going to be spent driving a car, you wanted to make sure you'd be able to have some music to put on. And that's everything. Hey, let me take that for you, Joy. I'll stow it in the RV. There's a few spots left it'll fit. You let Kyra take your bag and gave her a grateful smile. With nothing left to do, you watched the others get ready for the trip. Kyra and Cliff seemed to have the most energy of anyone. They were finishing packing the suitcases away while your moms had gone to lock up the house. They high-fived one another one got crammed into the storage compartments of the vehicle. Enthusiasm. Even though your own parents were more low-key than Cove's, you could tell they were both excited for the trip. It had been a while since your family had been away anywhere together. Elizabeth skipped towards the RV, a bag slung over her shoulder, and you were surprised to see she seemed more optimistic about the whole ordeal now. Usually she wasn't one to exit the confines of her room unless it was for TV or food or to leave her family behind to be with her friends. Yeah, that sounds like teenage years. You would have thought 3 whole days packed in an RV with 6 others would be too much for her, but it was nice. But it was a nice surprise. You supposed any vacation was better than no vacation in her mind. Cove had been pretty quiet so far, and more than anything, seemed to be overwhelmed by the situation. After years of long-ass car rides, eager to get to the destination, fuck the drive. You've been looking up the park online and couldn't wait to explore everything it had to offer. Soon the miscellaneous remaining tasks had all been wrapped up. Everyone piled into the RV. It was officially time for the trip to start. And it did. Cliff took the first shift driving. He cautiously navigated the massive car out of the narrow neighborhood streets. It was touch and go for the first part of the journey. Your moms and Cairo were all huddled at the front, trying to get a view of how much space they had on each side. There was a sense of relief when the first long leg of the trip was hit, and the RV would only need to go down one stretch of highway for miles. The mom group cleared out of the driver's area, leaving Cove's dad to it, taking more comfortable seats around the main cabin. You felt like you could finally relax now, too. Time slipped by as morning faded away. Before you realized it, the engine of the RV came to a stop, but only halted for a few moments as Cliff climbed out of the driver's seat and Mom took over. Ma was sitting shotgun, giving Mom a quick tutorial on the controls, as it was her first time driving anything this large. Cliff groaned as he headed towards the rest of you, stretching his arms above his head and loosening up his muscles. We're making good progress. Yeah, maybe you should take a nap in the back for a while. That was a long haul you just did, and I know you're on less sleep than usual. Oh, I don't know if I can make this go away, but I just noticed her hair is actually really long. I thought it was just like shoulder length, but no, it goes way down. Sorry, I only just saw it. I am easily distracted. Cliff waved a hand, that trademark grin of his slipping into his face. I don't need sleep. I still got a few miles in the old tank. He flexed an arm, showing off his muscles to drive the point about how resilient he was home, and Kyra rolled her eyes in amusement. Dad, everyone has to sleep. Cove shook his head at the tough guy act, though Cliff simply chuckled and ruffled his son's hair.
So?
Are you going to be driving again anytime soon, Mr. Holden? I want to know so I can prepare. Did anyone pack some rope? I might need it. There's no seatbelts up here. Elizabeth called down from where she was lounging in the loft above the driving compartment. She was laying on her back, her hair falling over the side and swinging around as the RV started up again and took off down the road. A bag of potato chips was balanced on Elizabeth's stomach, and she tossed a couple in her mouth right as Cliff held a hand to his chest, pretending to be offended by the remark. Kyra laughed lightheartedly.
Don't worry about it.
Lucky for all of us, we have enough adults to cover the shifts today. He won't be driving again until tomorrow. I'm gonna join in. Just enough time to write up my will and testament. Not you, too. The rest of the group laughed while Cliff pouted, and you gave him an apologetic shrug. Mom then shouted back in her seat to join in the conversation, a playful smile tilting her lips. What I'm more worried about is this old monster getting us there and back again before falling apart. It looks as though it was built in the early 90s. It must be older than some of the occupants. That's just the aesthetic of the decor. It's not that old. I think. Did you ask what year the model was before you rented it? You better have asked. Kyra wrinkled her nose and thought.
Hey!
Yes, I did. I just can't remember what the answer was. That's relatable. That is very relatable. Cliff chuckled at her while the rest of you let out a collective sigh. The RV lurched a little as it picked up speed, and you held onto the ladder to the loft to keep your balance. You felt something graze the top of your head before a weight settled on your red hair. When you tilted your chin up carefully to look, you heard the rustle of the bag of chips and realized Elizabeth had rested the end of it on your head. She gestured to the opening, silently offering to share her snack. Aww. You took a handful. Reaching up, you scooped up some chips. After that, the weight of the packet left your scalp. You happily munched away as the conversation continued on, and you got closer and closer to your destination. The day flew by with the group of you chatting, playing games, and passing the time together before finally arriving at the park and setting up for the night. Ma was closing the windows while everyone got ready for bed, saying goodnight to the others as she made her way to the back room. You all had dinner together while still driving, and some hours after had arrived at your destination and found a spot to park in for the rest of your stay. Giving a look across the front of the RV, you noticed almost everyone there was already dozing off where they were, with Cove having completely fallen asleep, curled up in the passenger seat. He must have done so while Cairo was driving the last leg, and they had decided not to disturb him. Kyra herself was the only one up there who was still awake, flipping through a magazine next to a portable light from her spot on the couch. It seemed Mr. Holden needed to sleep despite his claims. You followed your moms in the back room and closed the door behind you before crawling onto the bed between them. It was a queen-size bed, so there was enough space for the three of you together without too much squishing.
Good night.
Get a good rest, Joy. We've got a big day ahead of us tomorrow.
That's fantastic.
I'm looking forward to the bushwalk in the morning. It's been a long time since I was out in nature like this. There will be plenty for us to see. You stayed awake for a little while longer while your moms whispered about the park and forests in general. With the sound of their voices in the background, eventually you nodded off to sleep. The next morning, you were up bright and early, preparing for the day ahead. So, personally, I never sleep very well on road trips. Mostly because sleeping in particularly moving vehicles has, I don't want to say childhood trauma, but like, I've had some bad experiences with that, so I never fully relax in a car or any other vehicle. So I'm gonna say you had slept terribly. There hadn't been enough room for you to spread out or readjust your position. The mattress was uncomfortable, and it became hot with two other people next to you. Mom whined a bit about the firmness of the mattress, but Mom had only encouraged her to enjoy the trip while she could. While looking for a spot to get ready, you had some trouble finding a space of your own as the others were doing the same thing. Cove was perched on top of the counter, brushing his hair and tucking up his legs every time someone wanted to move past. The parents were checking, double-checking, and triple-checking that you had everything, to the point where you had stopped listening to them altogether. You knew you wouldn't be returning to the RV at all that day, but by the look of the backpacks that were packed up and ready to go, you doubted anything was missing from them. It didn't take much longer until you all exited the RV in a bustle and headed into Redwood National Park. Cove had his head tilted up towards the canopy of trees, his eyes wide as he took in the massive trunks on either side of you. You knew that the redwood trees here were considered the tallest trees on Earth, but you weren't prepared for exactly how huge they would be in person.
Come on.
Smile, you two! Oh no. You spun just in time for Kyra to snap a picture of you and Cove together before she pointed her camera at Cliff, trying to get a shot despite his weak protest that she should just enjoy the moment. Your parents were walking behind the group a little, with Mom telling Ma some information she read about the park in a brochure. Ma listened happily while looking around and taking in the sights, every now and then asking a question or making a joke about something Mom had said. You smiled at them, thinking your mom must have read a lot of pamphlets to know so much about the park. Maybe you should come and work here as a tour guide if you know so much about the place. Elizabeth teased, earning a squeeze on the nose from your mom. She seemed to be enjoying herself, but you thought that might just be because she was amused by everyone else's reactions. It counts. You were in awe of the redwood trees. Surrounding you on either side, the enormous trees shot up into the sky, the sunlight peeking through their canopy and speckling the path in front of you. The sheer size of the redwoods made you feel like a tiny ant bustling along through the forest. The adults had decided on some casual nature walks rather than any serious hiking, and you strolled along at your own pace, taking in the scenery. Elizabeth sped up a little, smirking at Cove as she fell into place between the two of you, and immediately you could tell by her expression she was going to say something taunting. Oh no. I can't believe her families are actually on vacation together. She threw her arms out, speaking with a genuine sense of bewilderment. I would have joked about something like this happening, but now I'm not sure I want to give them any more ideas. Cove smiled at her, even if it was a little awkwardly, and continued walking along. Just watch. Next year they'll be talking about their next new amazing idea. She put on a fake voice, deeper than her own. We should just sell both our houses and move in together. Think of how much we'd save on the mortgages. It was clear that Elizabeth was being sarcastic. Cove simply shook his head, not really bothered by her. He supposed he was used to it by this point. But seriously, they really do act like we're a single family just because we live across the street from each other. Elizabeth gave you and Cove a look, her eyes glittering with mischief as she leered at you.
Yeah.
Maybe one day we will be related, legally anyway. She said it as though she was a gossipy old lady. But she almost immediately dropped the tone and nonchalantly said her real thoughts. At least, that's what Ma thinks. Cove still blushed, which made Elizabeth smile triumphantly, as though that was her whole purpose for teasing him. Aw. Then he mumbled quietly, refusing to make eye contact with either of you. Aww. I don't know why you think you're so funny when no one else does. Aww. I'm kind of torn between ignoring Elizabeth and being embarrassed. You were embarrassed. Why did she always have to say things like that? It wasn't fun, and she knew it. After no further replies, your sister walked ahead. You and Cove swapped uncomfortable looks. The day continued on with plenty to see and experience. You passed a few different activities that you would have liked to try out if you had the time, such as kayaking and rock climbing, but Ma said that you would have to wait for another trip. There was a little stream during the walk that you sat beside and set out a picnic for lunch, nibbling on a selection of fruit, sandwiches, and chips. Various birds flew overhead, and you made a game out of guessing the species that were hanging out in the trees nearby. You even managed to get a couple of them right, including the kingfisher that grabbed half of Cliff's sandwich. You were glad you got to do this in the end. It was definitely a special experience, and one you'd remember for a long time to come. You smiled to yourself, committing the sights and sounds to memory. Your group made it back to camp just as the sun was setting in the sky and the stars were appearing one by one. Everyone had enjoyed different parts of it most. You traded stories of what you thought while you were eating dinner, and then afterwards you pitched in to help clean up. You, along with Elizabeth and Cove, got to head back to the RV early. Excuse me. And spend some time together while the parents stayed outside longer. It was nice to have a space to yourselves after the cramped journey there, and while Elizabeth had locked herself in the back room with her headphones, you and Cove were left in the main lounge area. Ooh. Of course I'm hanging out with Cove. You hung out with Cove. Well, let's take the load off. We've got some time. You took a seat on the sofa while Cove sat down on the other end, tapping his fingers against his knees. Your cheeks warmed a little at that. Being close to him never failed to feel exciting. Aw. You'd seen Cove nearly every day for the past 5 years, but seeing him in a jacket was still somewhat unusual. In Southern California, you could get away with that. It was a simple difference from his normal style, yet you couldn't help noticing the way he looked right now. It looked great on him. In fact, Cove always looked nice. When Cove cleared his throat, your eyes snapped to his. He had an eyebrow raised and had clearly caught you staring at him.
What?
Is everything okay? I'm just checking you out. Shut up. I'm gonna go for the open mouth insert foot option. At least that's the way I read it. That might not be the way it goes. Yeah, everything is really good. You smiled knowingly to yourself about why you felt that way while Cove watched on in confusion. You decided to explain a part of it. You know, I hardly ever see you wearing a jacket, especially in summer.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I like wearing as few layers as possible. It's easier that way. I'd rather be cold than extra hot, and it's kind of a pain to carry extra clothes around. My parents made me bring this jacket. I'm kind of in a space of I love the winter because I get to wear heavier clothing that's usually very snuggly, but I despise being too hot. I cannot handle it all. So I'm just gonna say I'm the same way. They're bulky and heavy and they usually make me feel too warm. Cove smiled lightly at you and nodded. I've noticed. You perked up hearing that. He noticed you too? You asked him what he liked to see others wear. So, what type of clothes or accessories do you like to see on somebody other than you? That expression! Cove's eyes widened at the question. His defensive reply seemed to slip out before he'd had the chance to have a proper think about it. Nothing? Cove! That was the wrong response! I'm not letting this go. That was funny. A snort of laughter escaped you, and even though Cove's face flushed red, you could see the hint of a smile on his lips too.
Come on.
Come on, that's not what I meant. You composed yourself and sat up straighter, all traces of laughter disappearing from your face. Answer with what you do mean, then. Isn't there anything at all you think looks good when you see it on someone? Cove mumbled under his breath, and you couldn't quite catch the words. He was having a difficult time with the subject. Aww. I swear I won't make fun of you. That's not really it. Cove seemed pretty grumpy about your statement, but you weren't ready to give up so easily. Please? Cove sighed and looked down at his lap, where he was fidgeting with his hands, still reluctant to give an answer.
I don't know.
Aww. You made an unimpressed sound over how this was going. Are you sure? Fine, I guess. I kind of like ankle bracelets. Ankle bracelets? Yeah, everyone can wear a pretty bracelet. Wrist ones are cool too, but they're pretty normal. There's something fun or flirty about ankle bracelets. Oh?
I mean...
It's more special or something. I don't know how to explain it. We're learning so much about Cove right now. Cove brushed his knuckles against his cheek awkwardly, seemingly unsure where to go from here. Every fiber of my being wants to pick this choice. Every fiber. I feel like it's out of character, but you know what? We're doing it. We are doing it. I'm giving in. I'm having fun. So, you think they're sexy?
What?
What? No, I can't believe you used that word to describe it. Cove had been absolutely scandalized by your statement, and you could only laugh. When he said nothing else, you took a moment to gather your own thoughts. Maybe you'd wear your anklets more now. You had a couple of different ones at home. With this new knowledge, you might slip them into your daily outfits in the future. Cove looked away again, feeling awkward about this. You gave him an understanding look, and usually he would start to smile like normal again, but not this time. His expression only stiffened more. You were surprised to see him like this, as he always bounced back pretty quickly after being flustered. Oh no, did I push him too far? I'm sorry. Cove? Still, he wouldn't look at you, and now even his breathing was growing tense. It began to click. He was trying to build himself up enough to say something hard for him. You waited for it silently. Until, finally, he peeked your way through the corner of his eyes. You were fully attentive by this point for whatever he was going to mention next.
That's,
People having brown eyes. That's also something I like. Aww. Huh? For a moment you were stunned at a complete loss for words. That was definitely not where you imagined this was going. Cove faced you head on, his expression full of desperate meaning. You got the distinct impression he hadn't chosen that just because he liked the color brown. He chose it entirely because it was your eye color. Ooh. Was he trying to flirt with you? That was all you could think. Your legs felt like jelly and you wondered if you might fall right off the couch. What do you like in another person, Joy? Oh boy! How much do I want to expose myself? I'm gonna be bold. We're being very bold this trip. Everything about you. Cove went still, his eyes widening in surprise. It was definitely a lot for him to hear, but you couldn't help yourself. It was the truth. You adored him. Ah. And now you were both flirting with each other. I love it. He placed his hands in his lap and looked down. It seemed he hadn't expected to get this far and didn't know where to go from here. The mission was too successful. What do we do now? With that, the topic abruptly dropped off. Cove officially had no more to say on it. The parents all arrived soon after, each of them climbing into the RV and finding some place to sit down and rest their legs. Elizabeth, having heard the commotion, came out from the room for the first time since arriving and joined you all. You spent the evening chatting and playing a few games, enjoying the last evening of the trip together. Bedtime arrived within the blink of an eye. As the group hunkered down for the night, your mom did a final round to be sure nothing had been left behind. She explained that Cliff was going to start driving early in the morning, like on the first day, but would be letting everyone else in the group sleep. There wouldn't be a need for all of them to get up. Now was the time to check you hadn't left anything outside. You, as well as everyone else, were confident you had it all packed up inside the RV, which meant it was time to get some rest before the journey home tomorrow. Your moms and Elizabeth said goodnight, heading to the back room, while you climbed up to the loft. Cove and his family got situated below in the previously set arrangement. You tried to get comfortable as a million thoughts were running through your mind. It was hard to believe that the trip was practically over, and before you knew it, you'd be back in your own bed at home. You enjoyed this mini adventure. It was short, that was for sure, but you got to see and do so much during your time here. All in all, it was a nice break away from home. The minutes ticked by silently. It didn't take long for the soft snores of Cliff and Kyra to drift up to you. They were asleep now. You wondered if Cove was still awake and decided to poke your head out from the loft to find out. You blinked through the dark. Looking down the hall, you noticed Cove laying on his back, his eyes staring straight up at the ceiling. His seafoam hair was spread out on his sleeping bag. He must have felt you watching him, because suddenly his eyes locked on yours. It was difficult to see much in the dim light, but you could make out the crooked smile on his face well enough. You grinned back at him. Cove shrugged in his bed while still smiling, or at least, you thought he did. We're gonna be bold. We've been bold all episode. Let's just keep being bold. See where this gets us. You then gestured for him to come over. Cove looked unsure about it, but you were happy to see him slowly start to sit up anyway. His sleeping bag rustled as he moved, though he tried to go slow and froze up like a deer in headlights every time he made a sound, watching his parents for any sign of movement. Eventually he managed to maneuver around his sleeping bag. Eventually he managed to maneuver around his sleeping dad and make it to the ladder, standing on the bottom rung where he looked up at you and whispered. What? Snuggles? Snuggles. You invited him up to the loft. Do you want to come up? His eyes widened just so. You could only tell because he had come to where you were. Cove glanced behind him quickly at his sleeping parents before turning back to you. Okay. Yes! You broke out into a grin and scooted back as far as you could, making space for Cove to crawl in. He was very tall, so it wasn't a great fit for him, but he managed to squeeze himself in. He understood how that felt, and with the two of you in the loft together, there was barely any room to move. Oh my. You laid down next to each other on your sides, face to face. He got under the blanket a bit. One of his arms was nested under his head for comfort. The other had nowhere to go and was rested alongside his chest on the floor of the loft. Cove spoke to you softly. So, what am I doing here? I'm so torn. Let's just see where this gets us. You can sleep here instead of on the floor. Cove raised an eyebrow, not having expected you to bring up the topic again.
It's okay.
You're still thinking about that? You don't have to worry about me that much, Joy, but thanks. It's okay. I'm not sure about this. Cove swallowed loudly, and you noticed he wouldn't look you in the eyes anymore. Oh boy. I'm just gonna expose myself a little bit and admit that I derive extreme pleasure from embarrassing my wife. So I'm just gonna say his reaction made you happy. It was nice to know that this didn't seem like nothing to him. You wanted him to take you seriously. You thought back to earlier in the evening when you and Cove had been talking alone on the sofa. You had definitely been flirting then, and now you were here. Let's be bold as fuck. You nudged closer to him. You inched towards Cove slowly, your legs pressed together in the very limited space. Cove's face flushed dark enough to notice even the almost pitch-black RV cabin. The hand resting in front of him tightened, balling into a fist. Are you okay? You seem tense.
Yeah.
I'm fine. I mean, I'm not dying or anything. Are you sure? Cove's eyebrows bent up nervously, but his smile widened. He followed your lead and curled himself deeper into the loft and closer to you. He looked away as he did it. There was almost no space left between he and you. Cove's breath tickled the side of your face. For a moment you stayed together like that. Neither of you spoke a word. When your eyes locked again, Cove seemed almost taken aback by the situation, as though it hadn't completely hit him what it was going to feel like to do this until just now. He opened his mouth to say something, but shut it tight before anything came out. Snuggles! You snuggled against him. You closed the distance completely and nuzzled your face into the top of his head. His hair was soft. Cove stiffened up and let out a yelp, which he quickly bit down on his lip to stifle. I'm being too mean to this boy right now. He gave you an apologetic look. This still wasn't bad for him, just surprising. After a few moments, he settled in, his breaths deep and steady. He moved his head into the crook of your neck. Aww. You could... I'm sorry, it's too cute. You could feel his lips curved into a smile, and it made you happier to know he was enjoying the moment too. The two of you fell asleep before long, cuddled up together. When you woke up the next morning, it was to the rumble of the RV as it traveled the long journey home. You noticed quickly that you weren't as warm as you had been during the night, and when you checked next to you, Cove was gone. Damn it! Blinking sleepily, you peeked over the edge of the loft to find out where he had gone. Maybe he'd snuck back to his spot on the floor during the night? However, you soon noticed him sitting on the couch talking quietly to his mom. His head hung in embarrassment. Oh no. Your movement gave you away, and Kyra suddenly looked up and caught your eye. She simply smiled amusedly at you, and it was obvious what had happened. Cove hadn't gotten away with it. They found him there in the loft, and then you woke up while he was trying to explain. You knew it was going to be a long, long time before you lived this one down, if you ever did. I will never apologize for snuggles! Soon your moms and Elizabeth emerged from their room, dressed and ready for the day of travel. You spent most of the day hanging out together in the RV, savoring the last few hours of vacation. Kyra suggested a few different travel games she used to play with Cove when he was younger, and you all had a great time competing against each other. A little later in the day, you tried to talk to Cove about what happened in the loft, but he simply apologized and changed the subject. Aww. It was a bit too much for him to try speaking on, especially right now. You understood. Excuse me. When the RV finally pulled onto your street, it was well into the night, and you were looking forward to crawling into your own bed after the last few days away. Everyone else must have been feeling the same, because it was mutually agreed that unpacking and cleaning the RV would wait until the morning. Once again, you went straight up to your room and dropped onto your bed, shoes and all. You missed being near Cove. The two of you had basically been living together for 3 days. It was nice. But you knew that it wouldn't be the last time the two of you would spend time together, and that thought comforted you. With those last few thoughts drifting through your mind, it wasn't long before you dozed off to sleep. Tomorrow, life would go on like normal. That was a good one. I enjoyed that one. Honestly, anytime I get to tease the shit out of Cove, that's gonna make me happy. Anyway, I figure that's where I'll end this episode, and next time we'll end the summer and move on to the next step, and the final step that apparently they just recently released the DLC for, which, honestly, I want to come back to this game again on the channel. I don't know when. It'll probably be... I'll leave a bit of a gap so that I can do some other things in between. But I do want to come back to this and play through the DLCs with a new character, obviously. Because, honestly, the more I get into this, the more I love everything about it. It just makes me so happy. This whole thing just... I feel so many emotions. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in 2 weeks.